ها أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود فترى الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالصخور ميدان أرضه والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقان الحميد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين ينقضون عهد الله من بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض أولئك لهم اللعنة ولهم سوء الدار. آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Ra'd, the 13th surah, ayah number 25 tells us, and those who break the covenant of Allah after its confirmation and cut asunder that which Allah has ordered to be joined and make mischief in the land, as for those, upon them shall be a curse, and they shall have evil issue of the abode. This ayah of the Quran is very interesting. It has three very prominent subjects, and we shall discuss only one inshallah today, and that also very briefly. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala counts the main traits of corruption and the loss of reasoning. And He puts three things, very important things that are part of our day-to-day life. The first is breaking of covenants of Allah, the inherent, the rational as well as the religious covenants that Allah has given us and sent us as revelations, and those that we break. The second is cutting off of family ties, which is part of our relationships that Allah has made for us. And finally, making mischief or doing mischief on the earth, which is fasad, which is in other places known as even ashaddu min al-qatl, which is even worse than killing. One of the main issues that needs to be discussed, and that is what inshallah we plan today, is to discuss the issue of silatul raham, which essentially means to maintain relations with relatives. When we contemplate on this subject, we realize that when we have our relatives, our brothers, our sisters, our parents, these are a direct command of Allah. Nobody came to ask me or ask any one of us which family you want to be born to, which of the siblings you prefer to have, or who is going to be your uncles and aunts and your grandparents and all that. When we contemplate on this, it means that Allah decided by His command, by His amr, that He sent us to a particular family where He wished and willed us to be born, and that is His command. And therefore He says what Allah has joined, if we sever those relationships that He has joined and made for us, then we are violating and insulting Him and His wisdom. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And it is this part that he says, Ma amarallaha bihi an yusala, that which Allah has ordered joined. And this is something that when we disturb a system that Allah has created or cut off our relationship, it is beyond our jurisdiction, and it has been condemned at many places in the Quran as well as through ahadith. And we are told, and as an introduction, just one hadith to start with, and that is our fourth Imam, Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein Zainul Abidin salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, emphasizing the reality of Silatul Raham. He says not to befriend also anyone who has broken relations with his family. The actual hadith says, abstain from association also and avoid the company of those who cut off their relationship with their relatives, for I have found them cursed in the Quran. That is the importance of this. Now when we look at the deen of Islam, we cannot translate deen of Islam as a religion, because when we say religion, religion has a negative connotation specifically in the Western society, because we are considered, or rather the society considers religion to be very personal. It is a very personal matter for people and very limited as far as its impact is concerned on people's day-to-day lives. They have religion for the churches or the synagogues or the masajid on one day of the week, and that's about it. That we go for a ritual, and that ritual is over, we are done with what we have to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, Islam is a way of life, and deen of Islam teaches us how to apply every law in every aspect of our life. Islam has not left anything undone or left anything that is not explained. Sometimes the rulings we see are elaborate and detailed, and sometimes there are broad outlines that have been explained and very general latitudes have been given. Islam is not confined to acts of worship and rituals only. It is not salat, saum, hajj, zakat only. There is rather a very important and more important aspect, which is interaction between people. Whether it be worship, political, social, or any facet of life, it is explained and governed by the rulings of Islam. And as a matter of emphasis, not a mathematical calculation, but an emphasis, 9/10 of Islamic teachings deal with interpersonal relationships. How you deal with your parents, how you deal with your siblings, how you deal with your family, how you deal with people of the same faith, how you deal with people who have not accepted your faith. All these interpersonal relationships are explained and have rulings about it. And these interactions are very important. And to begin with, we start with our own family, our relatives, our friends, our community and society at large. And when we look at especially us, the Shias of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayk, we call ourselves followers, or rather lovers of the Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam. The very fact, the Ahlul-bayt means people of the house of Rasulullah Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So therefore, this concept of Silatul Raham, or keeping relations or keeping family ties, is very important specifically for us, the Shias of the Ahlul-bayt. In Quranic terminology, the term Silatul Raham and Qita'ur Raham, these are two opposites. Raham here means womb, the womb of the mother. But this is not only womb of the mother. What it implies here is our relatives through our parents and grandparents as well. And that is the Silatul Raham. Silat means to maintain ties. Qita or Raham means to break and sever ties. And this is a reference to all blood relations, all whom we have relations with, and it is an extremely important aspect, specifically when we are talking about that madhluma tonight and commemorating that madhluma, daughter of a madhluma, Zainab bint Ali wa Fatima salawatullahi wa salamu alayhim ajma'in. Before we go into the details of the ahadith of this particular subject, there is a very interesting study that was done in Copenhagen by the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. This study is very interesting because it speaks, and it is a study about the impact of those who sever relationships with their families and how it impacts the people who do that. And they say those who broke off their connections with their families, the risk of dying early is very high in them. There were 10,000 people who were monitored for a very long period of time to undertake this study. And the result says that the risk of conflicts, constant arguing within the family, will bring about anxiety, which causes early death in middle age. When we see this, that whilst there are many factors that could bring early death, this is one factor, but this study says it is one of the biggest risks, that when somebody is constantly involved in arguing or severs family ties or does not have any family connections with him, then such a person is vulnerable and will die very fast. Now, we must understand one thing here, that not everyone who dies in middle age, we should judge him that he was somebody who severed ties. This is not what it means. It could be other reasons or other factors. This is one of the biggest risks, that those who do severe ties with the family have a lot of anxiety and frequent arguments with the spouse, with relatives or friends, causes stress that leads to fatal results. When we look at this, we look at the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is our creator. He is the one who has actually created us and knows what our nature is, what we call nature of a human being. And Rasulullah, his messenger, and the Ahlul-bayt who brought about all these teachings to us and taught us how to live healthily and well and without anxiety and stress. So we see that it is also very interesting that there are tons, if not scores of ahadith condemning qita'ur raham, breaking of relationships, and encouraging silatul raham, which is maintaining of ties. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we look at the life of our sixth Imam, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayk, when Mansur-e-Diwanaki, the Abbasi Khalif who took over power and who was in power from the Banu Abbasi side, once called and summoned the sixth Imam to his court. And amongst the issues discussed, there were three specific ahadith that the Imam narrated in that incident. And one of them is very important and pertinent to our subject of discussion. Imam says, if a man has only 3 years remaining of his life in this world and he performs an act of kindness to his relative, Allah increases his lifespan by 30 years, adds one more zero after the figure. Allah adds this life more than what he had made his destiny as life in this earth. On the other hand, if one has 30 years remaining of his life and he cuts off relations with his relative or raham or the people who are family, very close family, then Allah removes and decreases his life to 3 years. And Imam stresses thereafter that Allah does whatever He wills and erases whatever He wills. Allah knows the eventual span of our life, but Malakul Maut who has been given the instructions, or we ourselves who are living in this world. We don't know exactly what Allah has granted us or has destined for us in terms of our life on this earth. Yet He is one who will do what He likes and wishes based on what we do in accepting and obeying to His commands. In fact, when we look at the a'mal of Nime Shaban that we do on the 15th night of Mahe Shaban, we even invoke Allah for a long life. Not long life so that we may be able to sin more, but long life so that we may be able to be more obedient and to be able to gather more thawab and more good deeds for us that will help us in the hereafter. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we look at our eighth Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida salawatullahi wa salamu alayk, he quotes an immaculate hadith from his forefathers, from his father until Rasulullah, and says that Rasulullah has offered a deal. Now this is our own terminology, that as Rasulullah has offered a deal, and he says that you guarantee one thing to me, I will give you 4 guarantees. 1 for 4. What is it? An Imam says that Rasulullah said that make me a promise of one thing and I will promise you 4 in return. Give me the guarantee of maintaining the ties with those who are related to you, and if you guarantee this with me, I will guarantee you that your family members and relatives will love you. Secondly, your sustenance and livelihood will expand. Third, your lifespan will increase. And 4, Allah will admit you into paradise, Jannah, that He has promised. What a deal Rasulullah is offering. And once when we see the life of Rasulullah, a newly converted Muslim from the tribe of Khafami, who just had accepted Islam, came to Rasulullah and he says, O Prophet of Allah, you are teaching us the best things. Tell me one thing. Tell me what is the best thing that I should do in Islam. Now he is a new Muslim, so he's asking what is the best deed that he can do. And Rasulullah says there are 3 things you must do. First is al-iman billah. You must have faith in Allah, the very foundation of deen. Second is silatul raham. After strong foundation of our belief, Rasulullah is telling us that the very second thing is to maintain family ties within our relationships. And third, he says, Amr bil ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar. The third stage means that it is a description of our social responsibility towards the community and society at large. Our interactions within the community, whether we are closely related or fartherly related, or even people who are not related altogether, does not matter. Our interaction and our Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar in the best format must be maintained. So the man now asks what is in reverse. He says, what is the worst deed that can happen in Islam? And Rasulullah gives him an exact opposite of what he had said. Rasulullah says to attribute partners to Allah, that is shirk, and severe ties with relatives, and to enjoin evil and forbid good. Today we live in a times that we not only not enjoin good, but sometimes we enjoin evil amongst ourselves. We have to be very careful because this is a prophecy of Rasulullah also for the end of times. And when we look at having or maintaining our ties of Silatul Raham, there are extensive and multifold rewards that have been promised to us in our hadith. Now the numbers that we will say is not necessarily the exact multiplication by a calculator. It is something that is a minimum level so that we understand the extensiveness of the reward that Allah gives. And our sixth Imam, quoting Rasulullah, says, extensive rewards and multifold rewards for Silatul Raham. And he gives this example and he says, when you give sadaqah, charity, you receive 10 times for every one that you give. When you give a goodly loan, qarz hasana, which is better than charity because it safeguards the dignity of the person and its self-respect and does not give any form of humiliating feeling to that person who is in need. Imam says the return is 18 times more than sadaqah. And then he says, however, silatul ikhwan, being good and maintaining ties of brotherhood within the community, the reward is 20 times for each one good done. Whilst the reward for silatul raham, maintaining of ties with and joining of ties with relatives, is 24 times. Now, this does not mean that we have to only give our relatives money or a monetary terms. Even a smile, even doing salam is also part of Silatul Raham. Before we go any further, because we have brought the subject of Qarz Hasana in this hadith, let us look very, very briefly at what is Qarz Hasana. Qarz Hasana is, there is a misconception within us that Qarz Hasana is pay when able or not pay if unable. That is not Qarz, that is charity. If I give you charity, then I am not expecting anything in return or return of my original amount that I gave you. But the very word qarz means a debt. I am loaning to you. The goodly part, qarz hasana, the hasana part is that it does not have any attachment of riba or interest that is involved, and therefore it becomes qarz hasana. But qarz hasana does not mean we do not have to pay back. If we take a qarz, we have to pay back. And this misconception must be removed from our minds. When we look at our own contemporary times, the middle-aged and the elderly would remember this, that back home we used to have an education loan from the Africa Federation. It may be happening with Nasimco also now, and with the other federations and jamaats also. I am not fully aware of what the programs are, but this was like a sanduk of qarz, where people had gathered. And in fact, there are communities even in this part of the world, other than ours, that have this sanduk of giving out loans. However, most of them have not been successful because people have this misconception that when they take that qarz, they don't have to return. Whilst the whole concept of that particular sanduk and that qarz hasana is that if it comes back, then somebody else can be helped from the same funds. And we'll see that even those days in Africa Federation, when we had these education loans, these were being not repaid, and therefore these funds dried out, and the misconception of Qarzul Hasana was really fatal and devastating. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we look at the ahadith, Silatul Raham is not monetary only. For example, the sixth Imam says, "O those who are related to one another, visit one another, do ziyarah of one another, and give hadiyah to one another," meaning give a gift, small gift of love, not necessarily expensive brand names. Give something out of love to each other. And the result of it, he quotes Rasulullah and says, when you give to one another, if there is any kind of hatred or detesting feeling, it will melt down any hatred and rebond the relationship. And when one goes to visit somebody in his relations, it strengthens the bond and love between. Mu'mineen, let us reflect back in the yesteryears. Those who were back home, we remember that there were times that we noticed that our parents would hold our hands and take us to our uncles' houses and our aunts' houses just for a visit in the evening. Was it out of culture? No, these are the teachings of the Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam. We would see and we would recognize that sometimes they would have a laugh remembering their own young days. And in that situation, we as young children would recognize our cousins, our second cousins, our third cousins sometimes. And when it came to days of Eid, we would see that our parents would plan on how to visit every relative on the day of Eid and not forget visiting those who have preceded us by visiting the Qabristan as well. These were the values. And as technology goes further and further, those days we did not even have cars. Yet there was not a single relative we did not visit. Today, there came a time after that when we started getting cars in our families, and the visits became lesser. Then when technology came, the phone call was enough. And today when technology is so advanced, we don't even write a personal message. We just forward one that came to us. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And when we look at the teachings of Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam, we see Rasulullah has advised Amir al-Mu'mineen. And let us understand this hadith very clearly. Rasulullah says, Ya Ali, if you have to travel for 2 years to do good to your parents, do it, Rasulullah says. And if you have to travel for 1 year to perform Silatul Raham, do it. And if you have to make a journey for a mile to see a sick person, make sure you do it. And if you have to walk for 2 miles to attend a funeral, do it. And if you have to travel for 4 miles to meet a believing brother, do not miss it. This is the importance that Rasulullah has given us. That even if it means traveling for Silatul Raham, so that we can keep our relationship, it is an important aspect. And then he mentions in this ahadith, the undertaking for this Jannah has the rewards by Allah granting 40,000 rewards for every step you take towards this, and erases 40,000 sins and forgives them, and enhances the person by 40,000 grades. This is what we need. So we need to have that direct connection with our relatives. And many times in these times we get this question that, oh yes, we want to maintain our relations, but our relatives are very unkind to us. And this is very common, and a very common question that comes from all quarters. Our diverse opinions and exposures give us a feeling of being opposite. Whilst we can have and make this diversity our strength rather than being opposite. The moment we start judging the other, he must have done this because of this. When we start judging the other, we will always find faults. But the moment we stop judging people, because judgment is reserved for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only, He did not give us or delegate that to anyone. When we stop this, we will see the good of him, and we will not even recognize the little shortcomings he or she may have. We must not forget a very important principle, that on the day of Qiyamah, I as an individual and each one of us as an individual will be questioned of what I did, because I am responsible for my actions. I will never be questioned of what your brother did to you, or your sister did to you, or your uncle did to you. It is their responsibility. If they fail to perform their responsibility, they will be questioned. But I should not sever ties. This should be my motto in life. Our eighth Imam says, maintain your relation with your kith and kin, even if it is by offering them just a glass of water, or even more important than that is if you refrain from hurting that individual in any way. That is where the rewards are. When we don't want to look at their shortcomings because it is for them. When we are good, they will be good to us, insha'Allah. However, there are limitations to Silatul Raham, like any other thing that Allah has commanded. We cannot be doing silatul raham or pleasure of our relatives at the expense of the commands of Allah. When it is going against the commands of Allah, then there is no silatul raham, there is no pleasure. Even there is no pleasure in obeying the parents if they are ordering us to go against the command of Allah. And therefore, one of the quickest examples that comes to mind is when our family has weddings in their houses and they invite us towards mixed gatherings because it is against the command of Allah. It does not matter if they feel bad. We cannot make them feel good and make Allah feel bad against us. We must remember this in all our relationships, that it is Allah that we want to please, and we cannot please anyone else at the expense of Allah's command. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When we look at Karbala, Karbala is a universal example for us. We see Silatul Raham there. And not only Karbala, if we look at the background of Karbala, Abu Talib, the family of Banu Hashim, the family of Rasulullah, they had established Silatul Raham from day one, from the onset. When Rasulullah was born, he was born an orphan. And very soon his mother as well as his grandfather passed away. It was Abu Talib, his uncle, who not only looked after and raised Rasulullah, but he even taught his own children to become a sacrifice to Rasulullah. There are many events, and inshallah when we get an opportunity we will look at it. When we look at Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and we look at the event of Karbala in specific, we see Silatul Raham. When Imam was called for bayat in Medina, he decided to leave Medina. And when he informed his family that I have decided to leave Medina, if Imam would have gone alone, it would still have been a Shahadat that was unmatched. Yet it was not a single member of the family that did not want to join or even hesitated for a moment to join Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. We see this because there was a family bond. Even widows like Farwa, the widow of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, went with Imam Hussein with her young children. In fact, when Abdullah ibn Jafar, the husband of Janabe Zainab, and Muhammad Hanafiya, the brother of Imam Hussein, were commanded by the Imam to stay behind, they felt sad about not joining the Imam. That is how much they loved the Imam. At the same time, there was that family unit. When we look at Abu Talib's sunnah, when the family was attacked and they were sent to Shebe Abi Talib, there were sanctions for 3 good years. Abu Talib took his entire family with him in Shebe Abi Talib to protect them. That was the family unit. And that was Abu Talib's sunnah. And such was his sincerity of that purpose, that not only him and not only his own very sons, but every Shaheed in Karbala who was part of Banu Hashim was Banu Abu Talib in fact. Each and every one, though we call them Banu Hashim, but they were all descendants of Abu Talib only. The very first Shaheed, for example, was Muslim ibn Aqil. Muslim ibn Aqil ibn Abi Talib. And Zainab, Ummul Masaib, was the pivot for Imam's mission and movement. She was a wife of one of the richest and wealthiest men of the time, whose generosity was known. Yet she left everything, with his permission of course, and went with Abu Abdullah, her brother, maintaining Silatul Raham at the same time, being a Sharikatul Hussein in the mission of Hussein. When we look at Zainab's sacrifices, how much did Zainab sacrifice? She became the backbone of the mission of Abu Abdullah's movement. She was such that after the day of Ashura, she was the mother to the children of Hussein. She was the protector to the women of Hussein. She was that she did not even cry for her own children, but whenever she mourned for the children of Hussein and her brothers. It was one day that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam saw Zainab reciting Salatul Layl when she was in a sitting position. So Imam inquired, "Oh my aunt, what is the matter? How come today you are reciting Salat in a sitting position?" And Zainab says, "Oh my son Sajjad, the food that comes is so little, I give away to the children of Hussein, and I get nothing out of it, that I have now become weak." Such was her weakness that when she returned back to Medina, her own very husband did not recognize Zainab. How can we imagine, or how can we even portray the sacrifices of Zainab? Zainab, when she was released from Sham, or the prison of Sham, we see that she goes to Sakina's grave and says, "Oh Sakina, we are going back to Medina. If there is any message for you, if you have any message for your father or your uncle, oh Sakina, we will be going to Karbala as well." Maybe she even told Sakina that I am going to come back in a few years. And that is how she came back to Sham when this Mal'oon killed her and Imam Zainul Abidin buried her in Sham. When she came to Karbala, can we imagine that when she saw the grave of Abu Abdullah, it is this Hussein who had grown with Zainab. They were brother and sister from childhood. They had grown together. And she had sacrificed everything. She may have told, "Ya Hussein, subbat masaibul lawanna, subbat alal ayyami sirna layaliya." Oh Hussein, Zainab has gone to Kufa and Sham. Oh Hussein, Zainab has left Sakina in Sham when she must have gone to visit the qabr and the grave of Abul Fadl. She may have said, "Abul Fadl, salam on you, O Abul Fadl. Zainab has undergone Sham, ya bastande bazu, Zainab o Kulsumra." When she went back to Medina, she had not mourned her children, but when she went to her husband Abdullah ibn Jafar, she made him sit down and said, "Oh Abdullah, accept my condolences on the Shahadat of our sons Aun and Muhammad." That is the first time that ulama tell us that she mourned her own children. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. مات يا حسين.